I. It expanded from a very small dynamite plant into the facility it was, and it maintained that size throughout the rest of its history. And how they did that, there was still some slag and some leftover material that was down in Dover. And we imported a bunch of this in here to flatten out the valley floor, to make it buildable all across. And that'll be a lot of what I'll talk about, is really driving the environment moving forward.
So where is that? You said you filled areas back in what year was that?
About 1915 to 1917.
1915.
Yes, leading up to World War I.
1915 to 1917.
And then just going forward, when you do in this area, because the transcript that is going to be produced is not going to know it, to just describe the area.
Oh, okay.
And point to that area.
Sure. So the beginning area was here, and it's in the southeast corner of the facility right now.
So in that particular facility, is the, right now still Ashland owns that, and that's not the subject property that's up for discussion right now for subdivision, right?
That's correct.
We're not, you guys,
It's not for subdivision, not part of the GDP.
not part of the GDP,
Yeah.
and not for development as yet.
Yeah, and that's the one I came before you and the consultant to start the remediation there. That's a longer scale remediation, and we'll get into that a little later in detail if you like.
Yes.
But yeah, that's what's going on right there, and that's in the southeast corner. So moving on into World War I and the great expansion. So moving up along the western ridge, and then on the eastern ridge, there was a lot of smokeless gunpowder. We were making propellants for all the main Allied countries in World War I here. And it covered the whole facility, actually. All the operational footprint is when it became developed. And then it waxed and waned. So during the Great Depression, we sold off a bunch of stuff. The facility footprint was still the same, but then when World War II came out, this became another big focal point. And we didn't hire quite as many people as we did for World War I. World War I, there was over 5,000 people working here. And then World War II was probably 2,500 or so. And then it supplied every war effort up through the Gulf War. So, and this plant produced the propellant for the M1 Abrams, the M2 Bradley, and then the A-10 Warthog. This is where the propellant came for those guns. So over the years, there's been a number of things. So I was talking about we did smokeless gunpowder. We talked about TNT before. That was the one for World War I. That's what we're going to work on. That's the Hercules tract. In the main area here where the development is going to occur, this was mainly a center hub for the site where we did the maintenance and everything. Also, smokeless gunpowder was around all corners of it. There was a finishing area where we finished it out, and up on the northeast, up this under Duck Pond, is what we call the storage area and shipping area. So as the products were finalized and finished, they got packaged and put up there, waiting to go out by truck.
At Duck Pond?
South and west of Duck Pond, down here. That was kind of the dying history. I mean, if I drove you around, I could go on for hours now.
Testify to the general number of buildings or structures and their locations.
So there were structures throughout the entire area. When in 1996, after Alliant Tech left, there was 325 above grade buildings. But through our due diligence efforts looking for all the stuff that had occurred, we found over 1,000 former foundations that we had since removed.
How many?
1,000. And what happened was successively, is World War I there was buildings, and sometimes the government would take back some of their items, and then we would take the building down, and then World War II came up, and we had more government contracts, so we had to build buildings back. So the buildings changed throughout history and time, but the footprint stayed the
So
same.
you made a statement of above ground buildings. Were there below ground structures just besides footings and foundations?
Footings and foundations.
Just footings and foundations. There's no buildings below grade?
No buildings below grade.
And, all right, so you mentioned 1996 being the closure. Talk about what happened at that time.
Okay, then I'll probably shift toward the environmental at that point now.
Yeah, I just wanted to also tap on the 1915, 1917, where you did the filling, or where they did the filling, because you weren't born yet.
Yeah.
When it came in, and that's the site that you guys are cleaning up now, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that fill occurred over about this area right here. central to the site, down to the southeast corner, and up to just south of Duck Pond, and out toward, this used to be a rail line out, so there was some historic field associated with the rail line they built coming here.
So that includes the area where the buildings are being proposed under the current application?
That's correct, Mr. Stern. This, where the building, where the proposed development is right in the center of the former manufacturing area.
And that's the area that was filled with this slab?
Yes, historic field, yeah.
Ed, where are you getting most of your, historic with that?
Okay, so, I guess if I say Mayor Riley's, there's two Rileys, I don't want to get confused. So, on this one, you guys probably remember Harry Pascoe, the plant historian. I worked with him a lot throughout the years. And then through Harry, we talked to a number of people. And it was really through Harry and his network that this is how this got here, and this is what we understand.
We've been talking about it all along. We all get a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Well, not as many anymore, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
a lot of stories about what happened here, when things transpired.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of all the dirty details as well.
Oh, I've heard lots of stories. Yeah, we actually looked and debunked most all the ones that were out there. But yes, we've heard that. It was really through Harry and his network of historical networking that he did that we contained most of that information.
Guys, the film was brought in locally. It was like for mining operations. It was fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Down in Dover is what we were told. It came from Dover because the plant was not level at the time. We had to bring it in to raise the grade so we could build all those buildings and employ those 5,000 people back then.
So there's nothing, that was owned by Hercules that you garnered any of this information from, or?
Other than it was Harry Pascoe worked for Hercules. I mean, that's we don't have any specific records saying we brought X tons in it.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I don't have specific records for that. But it will be it's addressed very similarly whether we have the record or not. We know where it is. We know what it was. So now
There is data on the material that was brought in.
excuse me.
There was data on the material that was brought in, or just no fill counts, just data.
We know where the fill was, and then we have sampled that fill since. So there wasn't data in 1950.
Right.
But yeah, we have tremendous amount of data on that fill. I'll jump to it in a second, but to cut it short, we do have about 6,000 soil samples on the site. We have a tremendous amount of data on this site.
Did that see your soil samples, or how deep?
Well, they range from 0 to 6 inches for some metals, to the majority of them are 0 to 4 feet. When we find most of the material related to the filling and then the subsequent use of the facility to be in the very top part of the subsurface, but it can be anywhere from 0 to 2. We do have some samples that are deeper in some areas, but the majority of them are under 4 to 6 feet and under. Like
4 to 6 feet under.
yes, so 0 to 6 feet probably is a good.
So we can talk about the closure. We have
Sure.
exhibits from the 90s and also.
Yeah, let's bring up that last one. That's probably the easiest way. Talk about that. Yeah, let's bring that one. Almost that one. Yeah, this is a 2023 aerial photograph. And exhibit 824. So when I showed up in 1996, Alliant was still finishing up, so I didn't come up at that point, but I really started in 1997 in earnest. So when we returned back to the site, we spent about 2 years planning, or what do we have here? That's when Harry Pascoe, we had a number of people. Some of you guys know Pete Braxton, who used to live in the area. He was one of the area managers, the finishing area manager specifically. A fellow named Dick Knoll, who managed the mission area from back in the day when we still owned that process. And we brought in as many of these people as we could and interviewed them and talked to them. What happened here? What happened there? What was this? What was that? What was this operation? And through that, we tried to sort out and figure out what was the base environmental. And this is where we started writing our work plans. So at the same time, like I'll pull it apart a little bit here, we started the demolition. And I can get the exact number of that. We started demolition in 97, and I believe we went that to 2003. But then from 1997 to 1999, we started writing out our work plans. We started engaging with the NJDEP over what they would like to see. We had some back and forth with them at the time, on what kind of stuff they would like to see in the work plan. And went from there, we started site investigation. The site investigation is where you look at the site, you identify, okay, we've got these areas of concern, we could have some kind of environmental issue with them. And this is where you first go out and sample. So we went out and sampled about 1,100 of these. We collected thousands of samples. And then we did SIs, the site investigation, we did site investigation for actually soils, groundwater, surface water, sediment, all the major media. And we finished them up in 2003, and then the NJDEP approved in 2005. And then after
What did they approve that? I'm sorry. What they approved in 2009?
they approved the site investigation reports.
Your site investigation.
Correct.
And at that time, the DEP was still, we'll call boots on the ground, doing the site inspections. There was no LSRPs at that time, correct?
That's correct. There was no SRP yet.
DEP, they were out and they just approved what you did for site inspections to submit to the DEP?
They approved the final reports. They approved the final reports.
So, what about the wells that were drilled out there that I actually still see on the site?
Sure.
Out there, can you just touch on that?
I can. So there are 84 wells across the site. 84 wells. And they were put in during the previous investigations, and their purpose was to understand what the groundwater looked like under the site, like identify anything that was in the groundwater, and then it's back basically which way the groundwater was flowing, so we would know where to put wells in the future if we needed them. And that's why they're out there. They're still there. They're still usable. We don't use them yet, but we will use them again when the remedies go in place as long-term monitoring to ensure the effectiveness of the remedies.
So, just so we can touch on the wells. So, who owns the wells? Who's paying for the wells? Who monitors the wells? Escrow for the wells? Who's in charge of the wells? And who's going to be in charge of the wells after a potential subdivision and the property sells? What does the DEP say about that stuff?
So I think we're asking. So right now it's Hercules, and
So who works for Hercules? Who is Hercules? Is Hercules still a viable company? Does it still have employees? Or is it just I don't know, call it a shell company? Is it still a company with employees, and do they have the escrow in place for the wells?
So there is no escrow for the wells for that, what you're talking about. That's something that comes future or through a remediation funding source. It's not really specifically at the monitoring wells. So Hercules is a wholly owned subsidiary. There are no employees. Every employee that was for Hercules went into Ashland Inc., which where I'm at. So it does exist. It's a wholly owned company under Ashland. So it's not a shell company. It does exist. It has real paper values on somewhere. I don't know exactly how that works, but
Okay.
yes.
What are the depths of the 84 wells that are there?
So they range from about 10 feet to 60 feet.
More closer to the 60 number, more at the 84 deeper or shallower?
About 50-50, because we were trying to figure out if there was any depth component to any. We wanted to make sure there was nothing deeper, or if there was nothing present in shallow or deep in the area we were sampling.
Okay.
84 wells sounds like a lot. It wasn't 1,000 acre piece of property.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not really that many. How were they strategically placed? And as you testified earlier, that whole site was part of creating dynamite and some other things, obviously through many years with tons of chemicals, explosions, etc. So how did you choose those 84 sites?
So, Mr. Mayor, that's why they went in a couple phases. In the site investigation we put in, there were some existing wells. I know we're going to talk about the landfill at some point. There are 3 wells we monitor for the landfill. So there were some existing wells there, and we added more wells. We saw where the groundwater flow was going to make sure that wherever there was former operations, we had things in the operations and downgrading the operations, so we could see what was the effect of the previous operations. Did I answer your question?
No, not really, that's the, you touched on the wells, but I mean, just throughout the site, I mean, there,
How'd you pick, right? How'd you pick your locations of being, you didn't have real data, you had conversations with people. How did you pick and really dig down and find out where you're gonna put this stuff for, find the contamination, if there was even contamination there? Is that your question?
So we're not talking about wells, we're talking about everything.
No,
You can touch on both.
yeah, monitoring wells,
Okay.
monitoring, yeah.
So they're somewhat separate here. The monitoring wells are to look for the general bulk groundwater quality underneath the facility. So they're not as specific as the soil samples. There's 6,000 soil samples, and there's one for each and every AOC, more than one for each area AOC we identified.
So when you do that, so we take that site photo right here,
Mm-hmm.
and you put a grid on it, and take 6,000, divide it into 1,100 acres across the area, maybe 20 feet apart, 80 feet apart, whatever it is. Is that how you do the samples of the grid to test the soil?
So
For those locations?
There's it's actually pretty complicated. So in the SI, we went to each of the individual AOCs, where there was anywhere that we did it with a
Don't
foundation.
use that. SI is,
Okay, site investigation. We did this the beginning part when we did the site investigation. So we went to each and areas of concern that we identified, and that was all the buildings we found during demolition. There was not a building foundation we found that was not sampled. They were all sampled. Every single one in some manner was sampled.
So did you stay within the footprint of the developed parcel?
No, we were all over the plant, all over the property.
In areas you thought were an issue? Because from what the
Yeah.
stories I heard, there were holes dug and things were buried all over the site, not just in the areas where the buildings were. So I'm trying to establish a baseline, how you put the grid together, why you pick them. You can say, all right, we only did, and there's concrete, we cleaned that up, but you dug 4,500 holes and we buried all different things over here. And, you know, like your stories, contractors were finding that stuff, excavating it out. But how do we get there? How do we help me
Sure.
understand that?
Okay, so in site, let me go through, get back to the site investigation.
So did you have a question? Jeff?
I was just thinking, is there a map identifying the location?
We do it, it completely covers it, we don't have it with us. We do have maps, I mean, it's in all the reports, the remedial investigation reports that I'll get to next, they have them all in there. There are maps with every single sample, each actual
And all the wells
geolocated
are
sample.
GPS coordinated?
Yes,
They are, so all the wells.
or it's even closer than that, so. In the beginning, we used regular surveying, so it's even more accurate than GPS.
And those maps were done by Montgomery and Watson?
Combination, so it started with Montgomery Watson, and then Kennedy Jenks, and then another company, Kennedy Jenks and Ramball.
And Ramble?
Ramball, yeah. They're an engineering firm in Jersey too, so we have two environmental consultants on this project.
1 second. Ed?
Okay.
let's just find out, were there any records kept by Hercules before you got in there to maybe determine where these holes were? Did they have record keeping? Were you able to review the record keeping?
We did see some
We
records.
had a lot of people speaking with you concerning that they weren't there and things might have been done. But was there anything on paper that you were able to use to figure out what's going on with the stuff?
I mean, some of the you're talking about these things we saw. We found paper from former employees that we did X here, we did Y there. It didn't make any sense to us, so we investigated each and every one of those. So we did look for all those.
But Hercules did have a department that kept records that said, okay, today we needed to dump, 10 ton of dynamite, where we're gonna put it. It was,
Well, I mean, we had a burning ground, and that would have been operational. And yeah, they did keep records of how many pounds of off-spec product went to the burning ground for destruction. We never buried that stuff. I mean, that's a complete untruth. That's a wild tale.
That's a tail.
It's a tale, a wild tale.
I don't know if it's that stuff, but I've had first-hand knowledge of people that told me they did bury stuff there, so.
Well, I walked all over this. I put so many holes here. I can tell you it's not true.
just tying on to my one question, and then what comes up is the duck pond all the time. Was there anything in the duck pond? Has it ever been tested?
The duck pond has been extensively tested. The duck pond was never used for. The duck pond was a water source, and our burning ground that we did use. It was permitted for a number of years. It's up here just north of the duck pond. You can see where it's still not some grass growing back all the way. So right along the edge of that, some stuff may have washed in, but the duck pond is very clean. We sampled a number of samples.
Soil samples were taken from the bottom of the duck pond.
A number of sediment samples.
You have
another
all the
separate
data on that.
We have all the data.
Was the duck pond ever utilized to explode underwater explosives?
No, it was never used.
Never was.
Never was. What that been confused
And
with.
that's confirmed.
That's confirmed 100%. Because where that was done is right here. Northeast of it, there's a shooting pond. And that was its sole purpose, for testing. We had a product line where we developed, when we were doing remote sensing for the oil industry. So when they would drive a ship and they would have towed array sonar, almost like you see on the war movies, but they would shoot down an explosive and it would go off and they would read the seismic returns. We tested that there. That's what that was used for.
Just real quick, with the DEP's 2005 site investigation report that they approved for you guys, my question is with the DEP, how involved were they? Was it more that you just submitted your testing, your numbers, and they signed off on it? Or was the DEP involved at that time with actually coming on site and having a first-hand eyewitness account of what was going on?
They were on site multiple times. I mean, Bob Marcolina was the original case manager, and then it transitioned to, I want to forget her name right now, but they were on site many times.
Well, were they on site to do the testing or to review your test results?
They've observed some of the testing. They didn't do any of the testing themselves. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Riley. There was one time they were on the edge of the site, and they sampled along the bottom looking for TCE, and they determined the Hercules was not the source. There were other sources. This was right around 2000. Actually, we split samples with the DEP at that point.
Well, other sources of contamination that either flowed onto the property or were there previous to them ownership?
No, it was well, because obviously this is the big beast around the area. So they said, okay, we got to test it. They were looking to see if we were a possible source area, and they determined we were.
That went through Kendall, I think, right?
Yeah, I think it's down south of the plant down here. There's some dry cleaners or a garage or two that they identified as being the sources.
So for layman guys like me, help me understand, if we know you're working on remediation now, we understand the site that they're trying to build on is remediated and there's methods to cover that. When they gave you the approval, but the entire site was still contaminated, I'm just trying to get past that. It keeps ringing in my head saying, you got DEP a final approval, but you're there doing contamination remediation now.
So we got approval for that phase, the site investigation phase. After the site investigation phase comes the remedial investigation phase, where that's where you build upon the results. A lot of this is a cumulative building up of what you learn. So we learned where there were issues in the site investigation.
So they never forced the hand of the second phase of cleanup, and was never a discussion to make it a Superfund site, anything like that?
Okay, so let's back up on the Superfund. So Superfund, actually I have the acronym here. I always forget the R in it. It's the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. That's really what
You can't say that 3 times fast.
No, I can't. I always mess up that R. That's why I had to write it down. So really, I mean, what that is for is if they can't find somebody responsible, we jumped up right and said, okay, we're responsible. We still own this property. We signed a remedial agreement with the NJDEP in 1995. I can get that exactly for you. I believe it's 1995. Nope, we have a remedial agreement with the NJDEP, so we're identified as the entity that's responsible.
Responsibility for everybody. You took responsibility,
Yep.
jumped up, so that clears it off the Superfund site. They know you're going to handle it. You're on the hook for it.
That's the first part. There's a couple of tiers to that,
Yep.
and they have a way of what they do. They call it listing a site, and they score it. We don't have anything leaving the site. We're not affecting any human health or the environment receptors off site. That's what scores on those Superfund sites. It causes them to get involved. We wouldn't score. We wouldn't score at all. They just wouldn't make it on that list. And they have a responsible party.
Okay.
Or there's not one.
And
You have 10 parties arguing.
the responsible party is
Hercules LLC.
Not Ashland.
Through Hercules, Ashland is. Ashland is always on the hook because Hercules also is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ashland.
Ashland owns her.
Ashland owns Hercules. Yeah.
Okay, so Ashland dissolved Hercules. I'm getting into the weeds, but if Ashland dissolves Hercules,
Well, through joint and severable, it's always going to be Ashland at this point.
And how do we confirm that? How does that put in? Is there an agreement with the DEP that you guys have, and how long, why did they let it go? So I know you weren't going off site, you weren't trucking anything off site, but how long does the DEP usually let a site go if you don't have an agreement? Hey, we're gonna do it, but it's gonna take us 20 years, or 30 years, or 5 years, or we're coming up with a plan for our second phase. How does that work?
So if you're constantly showing progress, this is a very big and complicated site. So it took a long time. And that's why we went through the remedial investigations, and they went up into final approval in 2016. So that we were still investigating up through 2016. And then to get into looking at what kind of remediation would we consider here, what would be the best for everybody. And that's what after 2016 started happening. And then kind of also the chicken and the egg, kind of why we're here with Hearts is when you do the remediation, it makes the most sense to understand what the final use is going to be so you can tailor it to that. I mean,
Right, well, there's certain, again, we brought this up, there's certain things that you probably can't put on this site, which I think came up due to the environmental issues that are there. So obviously capping and warehousing is probably a permitted use, is that correct?
correct. Yes, that way it works very well for this type of scenario.
So, Mr. Riley, go ahead, and then Greg, you got it.
So, this came up at the last meeting, I think, what is to tie Ashland / Hercules to moving further remediation once part of this parcel is cut off for development? So what's gonna force you to clean up the dump, clean up the rest of the southern part?
So, Mr. Riley, you talking about everywhere outside of the proposed?
Outside of where they,
Okay.
because we always had a concern back 25 years ago, we didn't want to get into the parcel update because sooner or later somebody's gonna make enough money and just walk through the rest of it.
Well, legally we can't walk. We're still obligated. We are the responsible party of record. We can't walk.
So is that a document that is happening?
Yeah.
Is there, now obviously we haven't seen it, we're not privy to it, but is that a document with the DEP that you have? And I know a CEO ain't going to prison over it, so, I see a lot of, I'll pay a $25,000 fine and
We're bankrupt, we're up.
Yeah, we're bankrupt now, so we're trying to understand, you have a wonderful history of it, and we're catching it back from the early 1900s, and there is a lot of tales that may be out there, and we're looking for facts.
Sure.
So we can come up with sound decisions and make good decisions to get there, and that's the question. You've done it?
Yeah. I don't think I got an answer.
Can you?
I will, I'll certainly answer. So, the 1995 remedial agreement would be the document where we signed with the NJDEP saying you are the responsible party for cleaning up the site. And that's really the document. That's what binds us to it. And he can't get out of that until you get the closures.
Why don't you talk about the funding obligations?
Sure.
Okay, give it a second, Jim, please.
It's still on the same one. Yeah, this is the same line.
Sure, and along those lines, so every year we have to file with the NJDEP and they review it in detail. It's what's called a remediation funding source. So we have to set aside that amount of money to make sure, for what we know, at the time we file this, there'll be money for that. In that
That's year to year.
That's year to year.
Yeah,
What
that's
happened?
that's in the agreement.
Right, so what happens at the end, what happens at the end of the year if the company doesn't exist anymore?
Well, the money that was in there, they get to use that money.
They
Whenever
burn that money up, but then
Yep.
there's no more funding.
it could. We're not going to go away like that, but yeah, that's what would happen in a situation like that.
And that's where what we're trying to,
Yeah.
we got the 8-foot pry bar out, we're trying to get it out here, but the reality of it's a 1-year agreement every year, and then if something happens,
How much money is that, sorry?
16 million this year.
16 million?
16,
16 million?
1/6. Yeah.
Did you get your answer, Vincent?
Sure, I understand a site investigation is basically to determine where there is contamination, what the contaminants are, whether it's soil or groundwater, and what, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
What is a remedial investigation? That started after 2005, I believe you said it was completed 2016?
2016, correct.
What's a remedial investigation?
So that's where you define the nature and extent of whatever the issues are, so that you can be. What that means is the size. what is it, how big is it, and you're starting at this point, how am I going to address this? You're starting to get the information on how am I going to address this?
Took 11 years
Yes.
to determine how you're going to address, even though you knew where all the contamination was and what the contaminants were in the groundwater and in the soil?
Yes. And for a site this size, it's actually not a very long time. Believe it or not, I mean, there's sites that go much longer than this, trying to get through that system.
And what was the conclusion with the remedial investigation? Has that been accepted by the DEP?
Yes.
And what conclusion were reached in the remedial investigation?
So there's a number. So I mean, the vast majority of this is historic fill related. There's metals and SVOCs in the top part of the soil column. Not very deep.
Describe historic fill and SVFCs.
Okay, sorry. I get carried away. We're full of acronyms. We go to town with us. Sorry. Okay. What was that?
Historic fill.
Historic fill. Okay, so we talked about historic fill before. That was the material we brought off site to raise the grade around 1915-ish. Because the way the facility built out, there was no way. We had to bring it from off site. That part we know. There's no way to put the amount in there, except it had to come off site, and that's where Harry dug up and came from over. That was historic fill we brought in, and that's largely driving the vast majority of what we're doing here. Other than what I came in before in that area down in the southwest corner, the Hercules is retaining, and that's going to take a little longer. And I can go into crazy detail about that one.
I gotta ask you a question.
Sure.
For 100 years that you guys were over there, and all the non-explosive gunpowders, chemicals, and all of that, you're saying that most of the remediation was soil that was brought from Dover that was contaminated to this site in 1915 and 1917?
Correct. Yeah.
You guys ran such a clean operation over there. There was none of that contaminated any of the earth over here?
The explosives don't use much in the way of chemicals. Actually, what would be typical for other chemical plants ruin explosives. So we really had very minimal of those on site. It was nitrocellulose, cotton,
I had to say
nitric
that
acid,
I
acids.
had to understand it. Because,
Yeah, it's really
you're saying, so the extent of the cleanup is the contaminants that were brought in from Dover, who was contaminated, that is sitting on the majority of your site, and that leads to other questions where you said you're gonna show an outline of where you put this stuff, because I had questions about other areas, and obviously the property is going back to the DEP. Was there fill put on that property of the 30 acres, I believe, that's getting dedicated back to the New Jersey Department of Environmental?
there was no fill on that. That was always.
It's amazing how that happened, right?
Well, that was a buffer zone. So we had large buffer zones too on this.
Okay.
So to keep things away.
So that 30-acre tract, that deal was cut quite a while ago, that buffer zone, or?
The conservation easement, is that what you're?
Yeah,
talking about?
conservation, the DEP, and there was no work, activity, fill, or anything on that entire area?
And no, I mean, we investigated it too as part of that. So we did
You
walk
had
it.
to prove that to them,
We did
right?
have to prove it.
Yeah.
So you have that drawing that depicts all those test pits or
Correct. Yeah. Test pits, borings, all sorts of test methods.
Mr. Meeks, did the Department of Environmental Protection, were they ever interested in taking over the whole site?
No, they were not.
No, they had to fund it. As long as somebody's willing to pay, I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere. We're set to fix this and clean this up.
So, are you gonna touch upon the actual fill that was brought in and what those contaminants were?
Sure. The metals.
If you had something else you were gonna go.
Yeah, I wanna button it up, so you mentioned before, historic fill, metals, SVOCs.
Correct.
SVOCs.
Okay, so
What is that
SVOC, semi-volatile organic compound. And then to specify even more, there is the polyaromatic hydrocarbons of those SVOCs are our primary constituent.
Well, that clears it up.
It's not easy. Is it? So,
Could you give an example of an SVOC?
sure, asphalt. A lot of what's in the asphalt is what would be the SVOCs represented on this site. Now, I don't want to miss. There are areas we are cleaning up. Obviously, we came in about the TNT area, so that is something that was a result of historic operations, and Hercules is going to keep working on that. There are small areas There'll be another area, the old burning grounds up here. So it's not just that, but that is the primary, by far, the biggest issue on site.
So TNT is trinitropolylene.
Correct.
So toluene is a very volatile, not a semi-volatile, it's a volatile.
That would be a volatile.
And is that in the groundwater?
It is not. We searched. I mean, that has also been in the ground. We stopped making it in 1919. Now, they could have been, we don't know. But as now, since we started investigating, we have never found toluene up there.
So that doesn't make it to ground, it doesn't go to groundwater, it stays separate.
I mean, it could, but we don't have it. It never got released, or it's gone, we don't know, but it's not present.
It cleaned itself, whatever, but it has not hit your monitoring wells.
No.
When did you stop testing those wells?
Oh, we test infrequently, but through the RI, the exact date I can't remember, but.
Or were they done every 5 years, every 10 years? You pull water samples out of them, the full depth, and they're done every year or every 5 years?
So we used them to figure out where everything was. And now we're going to reuse them again we don't sample them continuously right now. We're waiting for a remedy to go in place to test the effectiveness of the remedy at this point. Because we don't see any plume leaving the site. It's remarkably stable. There's not much in the groundwater. And that's why we don't sample them all the time.
When was the last time I think
I'd have to look it up. It's part of the RI, and
over 10 years?
so we do sample intermittently if things come up. So I'll give you an example here. So that's a hard question to answer. The whole site-wide is probably 6-7 years ago, but we are currently sampling wells right now around the landfill. We sample them quarterly. Around something that came up, PFAS. The NJDEP asked us, okay, you're a big old facility, you're a responsible party, we want you to look for it. So we did. So we have sampled for that. And we found it at background levels, basically atmospheric levels, right at 14 ppt, 15 ppt, 10 ppt, 4 ppt, way down at the bottom, right from the detection limits.
You want to just say what PFAS is?
I was considering it, but we want to get through the night.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys, I can't help myself. Correct. And that's over here.
And that has a CEA for it?
Yes. Over here. It doesn't. We have wells on the outside the fence line, and we don't detect it over there.
We didn't go down, sorry, but I'll get to, we did not go down there. We had a strategic path that we were taking, so we weren't privy to going down there, so we didn't know anything down at that site. We haven't even seen it. Well,
My primary question is something you just said, you're waiting for the full remediation to go in place to continue testing. So I'm gonna jump to the conclusion that happens after this project gets built, you continue to test, and you continue responsible if something turns up different.
Correct. Yeah. If something turns up different. Yes.
so also though, I want to backtrack a little bit so we're clear on it. In order to know what they can do and how far you have to go with the testing, what you potentially have approval for, is that correct?
Mr. Boss, I'm confused on that.
So say, we're gonna go housing in here.
Oh,
or
okay.
something. So you're playing what we're gonna do, how far we're gonna dig in on the cleaning of what's being built on site. Is that?
Yeah.
Each remediation is different, every scope is different for each project of what's going on. If somebody wants to put, a community pool over here, or, an amusement park, or residential homing, or manufacturing, or industrial, there's different criteria in that, correct?
There's correct. Yes.
So once you get to that portion of what you believe you can and want to build there, that's the path you go down for the final remediation of the property. Is that correct?
That's a correct statement. Yeah. More complicated, but yeah, that's true. What you said.
Okay. So did that help?
Yes.
Ed?
Mr. Meeks, it's, I guess, like an interview question where they say, what are your weaknesses? What concerns you on this site?
That's a good question. So, I mean, really, what always concerns us is what are that's the weakness of any remediation site. You can go down a line where but if something comes up, you have to go back and look, and we're obligated to go back and look, but we never know what that could be. That's the weakness that I can see, Mr. Data.
So the PFAS, that was only tested on the parcel, that was only tested on the parcel that the DEP's taken, or the entire site?
We negotiated with them and where it could possibly have been. So we tested where we had burning activities in the past, because we only would have had it as a firefighting foam and a triple F. So we went to the individual areas where they were burning. There was four that we tested the wells around those areas.
That's, I don't know how you got to that conclusion, because PFAS are popping up everywhere.
And we have no record of it ever being used. That's why
Nobody does, it's just popping up. We have Randolph, Roxbury, different places, we've had it in different areas in town. We've had, and it continues to pop up. The senator's house, old house, which is across the street from where he lives now, has it, he's in the middle of boot with nothing's been tried. So to say it's not there, you negotiated to not test it, that just doesn't make sense.
No, it does make sense. We looked for where it could have possibly have been used if we were to have used it. And that was the sense behind it.
For phones, only for phone.
But there's no other use on the plant for such a thing. We didn't use any of this.
All these places that are popping up, they had fire foam there, even though it's not a firehouse. We had it on a firehouse property, we had it, I get that, but it's popped up everywhere else that's never had it.
Well, then we would have seen it in the wells. I mean, they are scattered around. If there was a problem,
If it was tested for it, yes.
We did test it for it. We don't test it at every single well. We test it where the opportunity for it to exist would have been.
But you drew a conclusion that you can't back up with fact.